Well, so it's been a very, very interesting panel, and thank you very much for all your views. A lot of what you said is true, but I'd like to push the envelope a little further. First and foremost, as business people from Africa who work in Africa and across the world, we find that we're at the forefront of a lot of the policies that are put forward, a lot of the discussions that you have put there. We're the ones that implement it. We're the ones that have to deal with all of these things. Now, if I have to do a major project in Nigeria or anywhere in Africa, once it gets beyond a particular number, I have to leave the shores of Africa. I have to go to New York, or I have to go to London, and I have to go and get foreign currency outside, bring it back into Africa, do the project in Africa, earn in local currency, and suffer the consequence of a devaluation and all of that. So lovely that the IFC is doing what they're doing with local currency and local bonds. But this is our reality, it's what we have to face. And I've had to face this many times. It doesn't work. Now, one of the major challenges that we have, and you see this a lot in emerging markets, is that a lot of the exports that we have it in foreign currency. Now, the question is, why do we have the greater part of what we have to do in foreign currency, but I cannot borrow in local currency in a way that will impact my infrastructure? So take Nigeria, for example. So we export oil. Our oil is dominated in foreign currency, which is the US dollar. The US dollar dominates everything that we think about, everything that we do. A man on the street has an idea. The common man on the street knows exactly what the exchange rate is on a day-to-day basis. Now, that tells you that there's a major problem. There's a major problem when the average man on the street has an idea of what the exchange rate is of the local currency and the US currency. For goodness sake, we're not US citizens, we're Africans. We must deal and we must strengthen our local industry. We must strengthen our local currency. Now, the Minister of France said something very pivotal today. And one of the things that he said is that the European Union, at the end of the day, must come together. We've talked a lot about the fragmentation of the European Union and the need for it to come together to act and stand as a single bloc. And the reason why it has to do that is the only way that you can relate and that you can make a difference. And this is the case with Africa. Africa is fragmented. We have 54 odd countries all doing and working differently. We need to come together and we need to stand as a bloc. But what do we need to do if we're going to stand as a bloc? I work in 18 African countries today. And every single one of them, when I go there, I have to negotiate very differently in each of the countries that we go. Again, that doesn't work. It takes time, it's effort, it's a lot of pressure, and I have to deal in different currencies at the same time. We have different central banks, and the my AFDB colleague spoke about that. Again, a challenge for us. So what do we need to do? There's a very big importance that we must unify our currency. We must find a way whereby local currency within the African community has to unify. Now, this takes a lot of work. It's something that needs to be done and must be done quickly. But if we don't do that, it becomes a problem for me. So, and I have a major issue. The last aspect of what I want to talk about today has to do with where money is domiciled. For Africans, I take investment risk in Africa. And the reason why I take investment risk in Africa is that I am African. It's important for me to see that my continent develops. It's most important. So I will invest first in Africa before investing anywhere else in the world. But one of the things that we find, and you talked about it a lot, and thank you because I heard that over and over again. Capital is not the problem. There is capital, enough capital in the world to meet the opportunities that exist. In the EU, in the sessions that we heard today, what did we hear? We heard that there was capital, but that there was more capital than opportunities. Yet in Africa, what we see is the other way around. There are more opportunities than there is capital. So what's the issue and why is there this inability to bring the handshake? And you talked a lot about it. It has to do with regulations. Now, for goodness sake, let's think about one thing and think about it well. If the European Union is regulated and everything that the European Union has to do is regulated by the US, you're not going to be able to move. As long as Africa continues to depend on Europe and Africa to regulate it and set the regulations with which they are going to operate is going to be extremely difficult for us to move. And these are some of the things that we as Africans, for those who are Africans in the room, must wake up to that reality, that we must sit down and yes, regulate ourselves. We have to hit good governance. For a business that we're turning over $12 billion today, for me to access finance, I have to meet every single good governance and corporate governance regulations. And that's fine. I don't mind it. It's okay. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of doing, especially if you're going to work in Africa. And that's fine. It's okay. But what I'm saying here is that with African nations, we need to self-regulate. We need to look at ourselves. We need to ensure that capital circulates within Africa. So the African Free Trade Agreement was signed. It's interregional trade. It makes a lot of sense. And so what we're asking for our European colleagues, especially those that have had a lot of interaction with Africa, is that support inter-African trade. It's extremely important. Strengthen the institutions that are in Africa. It is important. But most of all, help us, work with us, and understand when we begin to create regional currencies that will finance regional projects, that will make sure that companies like mine that are African and Afrocentric as well can borrow locally, spend locally, live locally without having the destruction that comes with devaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tonye Cole.